The family accountant caught me at the elevator bank before I even made it to my mother's floor. I'd driven 6 hours straight from Atlanta with a gas station, coffee going cold in my cup holder, and the specific dread of someone who doesn't know exactly what they're walking into, but knows it isn't good. The discharge paperwork was supposed to be signed that morning. My mother had been in Gracie Memorial for 11 days after a stroke. That her neighbor had found her during, still holding a dish towel she'd apparently been folding, when the left side of her face went slack. I'd gotten the call on a Monday night and had my bag packed in 20 minutes. My brother had texted me twice during the drive to say that everything was handled and that I didn't need to rush. I rushed anyway. Some part of me already understood, the way you understand certain things before you can explain them, that handled and good weren't the same word. Vance was waiting near the elevator lobby with a paper cup of coffee he hadn't touched, and a manila envelope held flat against his side, like he was trying to make it disappear into his jacket. He'd been our family's CPA for 22 years, since my mother hired him out of a 2-room office above the hardware store when she was still running Pruitt's Kitchen out of a rented space on the town square. He was a small, quiet man who wore the same style of wire-rimmed glasses he'd worn when I was 9 years old, and in 22 years I'd never seen him look nervous. He looked nervous now. "You're the one who called me back," he said by way of greeting. "Your brother didn't." I set down my bag. "Vance, what's going on?" He looked past me toward the bank of elevators, then toward the nurse's station at the end of the corridor, then back at me. The envelope came off his side and into my hands before I fully registered the motion. Inside, I could feel the rectangular edge of something small and solid. A USB drive, I realized, taped to what felt like a folded document. "Your brother doesn't know I'm giving you this." He said it the way a man says something he's rehearsed, with a steadiness that costs something. "Don't open it here. Don't open it in front of him. Go somewhere alone tonight." "Vance, I've worked for your family for 22 years. His voice dropped low enough that the orderly passing behind him with a linen cart couldn't catch it. "Your mother built that diner from a sofa-seat lunch counter into something that could support 2 families and a full staff. I'm not going to sit in my office and watch someone dismantle it while she's still in a hospital bed." I looked down at the envelope. My hands were steady, which surprised me a little. "How bad is it?" He pressed his lips together. "I need you to read what's on there and tell me whether you agree with my math. Because if you agree with my math, then what's happening to your mother is elder financial abuse, and you've got about 10 days before the sale closes, and there's nothing left to argue about. I want to stop here and back up, because none of what follows makes any sense without understanding what Pruitt's Kitchen actually was to the town of Clover Ridge, Tennessee. My mother opened the original location in 1991 with a short-order lease, a used 6-burner commercial range, and the kind of stubborn confidence that doesn't come from money or backing, but from something harder to name. My father was alive then, working the line at the rail yard, and my brother and I were small enough that we spent our after-school hours in a booth near the window, doing homework with the smell of pie crust and bacon grease hanging in the air around us. By the time my father got sick and died, when I was 15, the diner had moved to its permanent location on Clover Street, with a full staff of 8, and a reputation for the kind of home cooking that people drove across 3 counties for on Sunday mornings. My mother ran it herself for the next 17 years, with my brother managing the floor operations, after he came back from 2 semesters of community college and decided his future was here. I left for the University of Tennessee at Knoxville on a partial scholarship when I was 18, and then went further still. A CPA license, a job at a forensic accounting firm in Atlanta, a life built carefully in a city that didn't know or care what Pruitt's Kitchen was or why it mattered. In a small town, leaving is a story people tell about you whether you want them to or not. By the time I'd been gone 8 years, the version that had settled into Clover Ridge was something like, my mother's daughter, the one who went to the city and didn't come back. Never mind the calls every Sunday. Never mind the visits every few months, cut short by a work calendar that didn't negotiate. Never mind that I'd covered 1/3 of the kitchen equipment loan the year the dishwasher doctor, and the walk-in failed in the same month. And my mother hadn't told me how close it was to sinking everything until it was almost too late. Leaving is the thing that gets remembered. What happens quietly while you're gone is what nobody mentions until it's too late to change. My sister-in-law came into the picture about 4 years ago when my brother married from 2 towns. Over who had opinions from 2 towns. Over who had opinions about everything, and the particular gift of making her opinions sound like common sense. She was charming in the way that people are charming when they've gotten very good at making you feel included in decisions they've already made. I noticed at their wedding reception that she referred to the diner twice as the property on Clover Street, which struck me as an odd way to describe something that served 200 lunches a week, but I was standing next to a glass of free champagne at my brother's wedding, and I let it go. I've thought about that moment a lot since. One sentence at a wedding. I let it pass. I wonder sometimes what it costs you, long-term, to let the wrong sentences pass because the occasion doesn't feel like the right time. My mother's stroke hit on a Wednesday morning in early April, 11 days before I showed up in that hospital corridor with Vance's envelope in my hands. She'd been alone in the kitchen when it happened. A neighbor walking her dog had noticed the front door standing open and gone to check. By the time I arrived that first night, the neurologist had already had the conversation with my brother about cognitive effects and recovery timeline. My brother had apparently nodded through most of it, and then taken my sister-in-law outside to make calls. I asked the neurologist myself. She was measured and careful, the way good doctors are when they're telling you something that's going to require adjustments. Your mother's memory and executive function have been affected, she told me. Decisions made in the next few weeks, financial decisions, legal decisions, especially, should be approached with real caution. Her ability to fully understand what she's consenting to may be compromised for a period we can't precisely predict. I thanked her and went to sit with my mother. My brother met me at the door to her room. He looked tired, but not the tired of someone who'd been sitting at a hospital bedside for 11 days. More the tired of someone managing a lot of moving pieces. "She's okay," he said before I could ask. "She's actually been asking about the diner more than anything," which, honestly, is a good sign. Inside the room, my mother was propped up against the pillows, with the television on low. She looked smaller than I remembered, which is the thing about seeing a parent in a hospital bed. They always looked smaller, even the ones who spent their whole lives being the largest presence in any room. She turned toward me when I came in, and her face did something complicated. Relief and something else underneath it, something she didn't quite say out loud. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." She reached for my hand and held it the way she used to when I was small, deliberate and warm. And for a minute, neither of us said anything. My brother stepped back out into the corridor, and I understood from the way he moved that he was going to make another phone call. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand that I was not looking for a fight when I drove up from Atlanta. I was looking for my mother, and I was hoping, with the part of me that still wants things to be simpler than they are, that whatever my brother had handled was exactly as straightforward as he wanted me to believe. Comment A if you would have opened that envelope right there in the hospital parking lot before you even went upstairs. Comment B if you would have done what I did and held on to it until you were alone that night. I'll tell you which one I chose before this is over. What I did was tuck the envelope into my jacket pocket and go up to my mother's room and spend 2 hours sitting with her. I helped her eat dinner. I watched half an episode of a competition cooking show with the sound turned low. I listened to her talk about the diner the way she always talked about it. Not like a business, but like something alive she was responsible for. "Your brother's been wonderful," she said at some point. Quiet, the way she said things when she was also thinking something else underneath. "He's been taking care of everything." I nodded. I didn't yet have any reason to hear the word everything as anything except a comfort. My brother and my sister-in-law had gone home by the time I left the hospital. I drove to the Clover Inn and sat on the edge of the bed in a room that smelled like industrial lavender and plug-in air freshener, and I opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a 2-page printed memo, Handwritten notes in Vance's small, careful print across the margins. The memo outlined a discrepancy he'd found while preparing the quarterly tax filings. The diner's actual gross revenue for the previous 14 months was 41% higher than the figure appearing in the financial summary my brother had provided the potential buyer. 41%. In the margin, Vance had written, "This is not an accounting error. I've checked it 4 times." I plugged in the USB 3 files. The first was a scanned purchase agreement for the Clover Street property and the diner business, dated 11 days after my mother's stroke, while she was still hospitalized. Her signature was at the bottom, the purchase price listed. $118,000. I sat with that number for a long time. The second file was an independent commercial appraisal of the same property, conducted 8 months earlier by a firm in Nashville. Appraised value of the Clover Street property and the diner as a going concern, $347,500. The third file was a series of email screenshots. My brother's address was the sender. His college roommate, the sole listed buyer in the purchase agreement, was the recipient. The emails went back 14 months. Planning. Coordinating. One email, sent 3 weeks before my mother's stroke, read, "She's not going to fight it once she understands it's the right thing for the family. And if she does, Carla says the paperwork can be structured so she doesn't have to." Carla was my sister-in-law's name. I closed the laptop at 11:40 and sat in the industrial lavender air for a long time. There's a particular kind of cold that settles into you when you realize the version of events you drove 6 hours to help fix isn't the version of events that's actually been happening. It's not anger, not exactly, not yet. It's more like the specific stillness, right before everything reorganizes itself, around a new center of gravity. I called a colleague in Atlanta at 11:50. She'd worked financial exploitation cases with me for 4 years, and she picked up on the third ring with the unhurried voice of someone who already understood what kind of call this was going to be. I laid it out exactly the way I'd lay out any case. The appraisal discrepancy, the purchase agreement signed 11 days post-stroke, the emails, the timeline. "2 things before you do anything else," she said, when I finished. "Get the county's own assessment on that property independently. Don't trust any number that came through your brother's hands, and that purchase agreement, find out who witnessed the signature. If your mother was cognitively compromised and the witness was someone connected to your brother, that's a problem for the agreement's validity. Build the record before you confront anyone. You know how this goes." I did know how it went. I'd just never expected to be doing it from a motel room in the town I grew up in. I was at the county assessor's office when it opened at 8 the next morning. The clerk pulled the property assessment history for the Clover Street address going back 7 years. The county's most recent assessed value, updated the previous fall, $312,000. A note in the file flagged that the commercial corridor along Clover Street had been rezoned for mixed-use development the prior year. Property like that with the foot traffic and the mixed-use reclassification, the clerk said, tapping the file. "I'd expect any arm's-length sale to come in somewhere north of 300. Anyone showing you under 150 is showing you a number that benefits someone who isn't the seller." I asked, as neutrally as I could, whether she could tell me about any pending sale documentation. She pulled up a transfer in the system. Closing date, 12 days from that morning. 12 days I subtracted the 2 I'd already spent, 10. I found Opal at the diner before the lunch rush, refilling the napkin dispensers the way she'd been refilling them at Pruitt's Kitchen for 19 years. She was 61, had worked the morning shift since before I left for college, and when she saw me come through the side door, set down the snacks and looked at me with an expression that told me she'd been waiting for someone to come through that door for a while. "You're not here for coffee," she said. "No," I said, "I'm not." She walked me to the back office and pulled a ziplock bag from behind a row of binders on the bottom shelf. Inside were printed emails, handwritten notes on order forms, a series of altered inventory logs. She'd been collecting them for 4 months. She told me, since the day she'd overheard my sister-in-law in the parking lot using the phrase, "Once the transfer goes through," in a tone that didn't sound like it was about anything good. I didn't know who to bring it to, Opal said, setting the bag on the desk between us. Your mother was sick. Your brother. I've worked for this family going on 20 years, and I don't want to be wrong about someone, but I know what this diner is worth. I've watched your mother build it for 19 years, and I know that what your brother's been telling the regulars. That your mom wants to retire. That the place is going to a good buyer who'll keep it running. That isn't the whole story, because good buyers don't need the books to say one number while the register says another. How long ago did the revenue start looking low on paper? I asked. She didn't hesitate. 14 months. Same window as Vance's discrepancy. I felt the whole shape of the thing come into focus, the way a case always does, right before you know you have enough to move. My brother confronted me that evening in the kitchen of my mother's house. He'd apparently been told I'd been at the assessor's office. He opened with exhaustion, the practiced kind that comes out before the real argument, as a way of framing you as the problem before you've said anything. You drove up here to help, he said, and the first thing you do is start digging through county records. You've been here 2 days. I've been here long enough to see the purchase agreement. Something shifted in his face, not surprise, recalculation. He'd expected me to approach him indirectly. I wasn't approaching him indirectly. That agreement is completely above board, he said. Mom understands what she signed. She wanted to sign it. She signed it 11 days after a stroke that her neurologist documented affected her ability to understand financial decisions. That's not. What's the purchase price? He went quiet for 2 seconds too long. Because the county's assessment puts that property at over $300,000, I said. And the independent appraisal Vance pulled puts it at $347. The number in that agreement is 118. Which means someone is either very bad at math or very good at structuring a deal that benefits someone who isn't the seller. The quiet that followed had a particular texture. The texture of someone who has been running a story successfully for 14 months and is now watching it develop a crack it doesn't know how to paper over. You always did this, he said finally, his voice dropping into something that sounded more wounded than defensive. Even when we were kids, you'd get this look like you'd already decided what the answer was, and you were just collecting evidence to back it up. Not everything is a case. This is our family. This is our mother's property being sold for 1/3 of its value while she's still recovering from a stroke, I said. Documents don't decide anything. They just say what they say. He didn't have an answer. Then my sister-in-law appeared in the doorway with her phone in her hand and her expression perfectly composed. We have a power of attorney, she said. It's notarized. It authorizes us to act on your mother's behalf for all financial decisions. Whatever you think you found, it doesn't change what's already been authorized. She said it the way someone says something they've prepared for, with the particular calm of a person who believes preparation was sufficient. I said okay, I said I heard them, I turned and left. Back at the Clover Inn, I called Vance from the parking lot. They have a POA, I told him. I know, he said. I've seen it. It was signed 18 days after the stroke. He told me he'd already been in touch with an elder law attorney named Rutherford, who'd reviewed the timeline and the neurologist's notes. She told me the timing alone is enough to flag it for undue influence review, especially if your mother can testify about what she understood she was signing. What did my mother think she was signing? A pause. She told Rutherford she thought it was a medical directive, that your sister-in-law had described it as a document to help manage her healthcare decisions while she recovered. I sat in the parking lot for a moment. Tell Rutherford we're moving, I said. We had 8 days. The next week was the kind of work I knew how to do, laid over the kind of grief I was still learning how to carry. Certified copies, a formal timeline compiled from Vance's files and Opal's bag and the neurologist's notes that Rutherford subpoenaed with a speed that told me she'd done this before and was angry in the particular professional way of someone who has seen too many versions of the same thing. The financial exploitation finding came through from the state's Adult Protective Services Unit, faster than I expected. The investigator told me plainly, "Your mother's case is about as well documented as these cases come in. My brother didn't stop moving either. He rescheduled the closing to push it up. He called people on the town council to say the sale was a done deal and invited them to a celebration breakfast at the diner on closing day. He visited the hospital twice while I was there and was, by all accounts, warm and attentive and gave no indication that anything was happening at all. The emergency injunction filing went in at 9:17 in the morning, 2 days before the rescheduled closing's date. My brother had organized a breakfast at the diner on closing day. He'd called it a send-off, told the regulars it was to honor my mother's legacy before the new chapter, invited half the town and the local paper. There was a handmade banner above the counter that read, "Thank you, Pruitt's Kitchen, 35 years of home." By the time I walked in, 60 or 70 people were packed into a diner that seated 50. Opal was behind the counter. She caught my eye when I came through the door and gave one small nod. My brother was at the front of the room, just starting to speak. My sister-in-law stood beside him. The buyer, my brother's college roommate, stood near the cash register in a blazer that was too new for a Tuesday morning. I let my brother finish his sentence. He was talking about honoring legacy while embracing change, language that belonged in a press release, and the room was listening with the polite attention of people who trust the person speaking. Then I said, from the back of the room, in the voice I'd used for 11 years of depositions and audit hearings, "Before anything is signed this morning, I think the people who've been coming to this diner for 35 years deserve to know what they're actually watching happen." The room turned. I held up the appraisal first. I said the number. I said the purchase price from the agreement. I let that gap land. Then I said the purchase agreement had been signed 18 days after my mother's stroke by a woman whose neurologist had documented in writing that her capacity to understand financial decisions was compromised at that time. That the power of attorney authorizing my brother and sister-in-law to act on her behalf had been signed during the same window, and that my mother had told the elder law attorney reviewing her case that she believed she was signing healthcare paperwork. And then I said that a state adult protective services investigator had opened a financial exploitation inquiry. That an emergency injunction was in effect as of 2 days earlier preventing the property transfer, and that the closing they'd all been invited to witness was not going to happen this morning. My sister-in-law said something sharp to my brother. The buyer turned to the title company representative who'd come with him and had a brief, quiet conversation that ended with the representative closing a leather folder and stepping back. My brother turned to me. The practiced warm version of him dropped completely, and I could see underneath it the face of the kid I grew up with, who used to take the last of everything and then look surprised when someone noticed. "You have no idea what it's been like here," he said, quiet and bitter. "You left, you built your life somewhere else. I stayed and I held this together, and I made decisions that needed to be made because nobody else was making them. You could have called me," I said. "I would have come." "You always say that." "I came now," I said. "I'm here now." Neither of us had anything to say after that. My mother had been watching from a chair near the door that Opal had quietly set up for her before I arrived. She'd been discharged from Gracie Memorial the day before, and I'd asked her that morning whether she wanted to come. She'd said yes without hesitating. She spoke into the quiet after my brother and I stopped talking. She didn't raise her voice. She'd never needed to, not in 35 years of running a room where she was always the final word. "I built this place," she said, steady and clear. "I want everyone in this room to understand that I did not agree to sell it. I was told I was signing papers to help manage my medical care. That's what I thought I was doing. That is not what I was actually doing." The reporter from the Clover Courier, who'd come expecting a puff piece about a beloved local landmark changing hands, wrote very fast. My sister-in-law left before my brother did. My brother stayed long enough to say, when the room had mostly cleared, that he hadn't thought of it as stealing. He said it like he believed it, and maybe some part of him did, and I didn't know what to do with that except file it somewhere. I wasn't ready to open yet. "I know you were here," I told him. "I know I wasn't. Those things are both true." But the fact that you stayed doesn't give you the right to take." He didn't respond, he walked out. I watched him go and felt something complicated and tired and not at all triumphant. The civil action to void the purchase agreement and the power of attorney moved steadily over the following weeks, with Rutherford at the helm and the APS investigators' report as the foundation. My brother did not contest it, which his attorney apparently advised once Rutherford submitted the full documentation package. The buyer withdrew. The injunction held. My mother came back to the diner 3 weeks after closing day. Not to work, just to sit at the corner table by the window where she'd sat every morning for 35 years, drinking her coffee the way she always had it, watching Opal move through the room, with the particular ease of someone who has memorized a space down to its creaks. The regulars who came in that morning stopped by the corner table one by one. Some of them just touched her shoulder and kept moving. Some of them sat for a few minutes. Mrs. Felton from the school board held my mother's hand and cried a little, and my mother held her hand back and didn't. My brother and my sister-in-law separated 2 months later. I heard it from Opal, who heard it from the mail carrier. I didn't feel vindicated by that the way I'd expected to. I felt something quieter, the specific exhaustion of watching a consequence arrive that you'd set in motion, knowing it was necessary, and still not being able to call it good. The state filed formal charges for elder financial exploitation in July. My brother's attorney negotiated a plea with restitution. It was a smaller consequence than it could have been. It was a larger consequence than he'd expected. My brother called me in June. It was the first time we'd spoken since the diner. He said something closer to, "I don't know how I let it get that far," which is its own kind of honesty, even if it isn't the whole thing. I listened. I didn't tell him everything was fine, because it wasn't yet. I told him I'd rather take what came next slowly than say something that didn't hold. The diner is still open. Opal's still running the morning shift. The banner from closing day came down that same afternoon, and Opal put back the original framed photo of my mother on opening day. 1991, standing in front of a lease sign with flour on her hands, and the expression of someone who has just done the thing they said they were going to do. My mother asked me one afternoon in August, sitting on the back porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea she'd made, too strong the way she always had, whether I was planning to go back to Atlanta. She said it the way someone asks a question they've already decided not to pressure you about. "I'm figuring that out," I said. We sat for a while in the particular quiet of a late summer evening in Tennessee, the kind that comes in low and warm, and smells like cut grass and someone's barbecue 2 yards over. "Your father used to say," she started, then stopped. Started again. "He used to say you were the one who'd always need to leave before you could come back and see clearly." I used to think he meant it as a criticism. I don't think he did. I didn't say anything. I just sat with it, the way you sometimes have to sit with the things people who loved you understood about you before you understood them yourself. Comment B, if you're wondering. I carried that envelope all the way through visiting hours and dinner, and half an episode of a competition cooking show, and I didn't open it until I was alone, in a room that smelled like industrial lavender, sitting on the edge of a bed in a town I'd spent years trying to get distance from, holding documents that were about to change everything. It was the right call. Not because the waiting made it easier. Because some truths need to settle in you alone, before you carry them into a room where other people are watching your face when they land. The diner was still there this morning when I drove past it on my way into town. The lights were on in the front window, and through the glass I could see Opal refilling the coffee urns, the way she's been refilling them for 19 years, and my mother's car in the lot, which she started bringing back 3 weeks ago, just for mornings. Just to sit in the corner and be in the building she built. That's the thing they don't tell you about coming back. Sometimes the whole point isn't to save what was there. It's to be present while it finds its way back to itself.